Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Saahil Murli Menghani. You're watching Checks and Balance. In episode number 3, we will be fact-checking the Indian government's claims that it gave a lot of advance notice to nationals stuck in Ukraine. That in comparison to other countries, Indian government's actions were much swifter. That Indian government was one of the first to send an advisory to its nationals in Ukraine. There is a narrative that's being built in the pro-government ecosystem that there were no shortcomings in the Indian government's response, that in comparison to other countries, the Indian government did much better, things much swifter, and that somehow students were at fault for not listening to advisory after advisory that the Indian government was sending. We'll put all of those claims to test and get you the real picture with concrete evidence in this most comprehensive fact check on this matter. But first, listen in to the claims the Indian government has been making on record.
भारत सरकार ने 15 फरवरी को ही युद्ध के काफी पहले एडवाइजरी इशू कर दी थी। उसके बाद 2 और एडवाइजरी इशू की युद्ध होने के पहले, और लगातार स्टूडेंट्स के लिए ये सुझाव दिया, स्टूडेंट्स को रिक्वेस्ट किया कि आप तुरंत देश वापस लौट आइए। 2 फ्लाइट रोज जाने लगी। 4000 से अधिक लोग उसके पहले ही आ गए युद्ध के, और आ सकते थे। प्लेन्स की कोई कमी नहीं थी, सीट्स की कमी नहीं। दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण स्थिति ये रही कि कई बच्चों ने उन एडवाइजरी को शायद पूरी तरीके से सीरियसली नहीं लिया।
काफ़ी कॉम्प्लिकेटेड सिचुएशन है इसमें। जो अगर हम देख सकते थे कि कैसे इवॉल्व होता था, तो शायद और भी देशों जो इन्वॉल्व है इसमें, वो भी उसी हालत से उसी प्रकार से देख सकते थे। और एडवाइजरीज भी अगर आप देखें, 15 तारीख को जो एडवाइजरी इशू हुआ था, जिसमें हमने कहा कि इंडियन सिटीजन, नॉन एसेंशियल इंडियन सिटीजन कैन लीव द कंट्री, तो हमने काफ़ी एडवांस नोटिस दिया था इसमें।
So multiple claims being made by the government there. In response to the question if India acted too late, the Indian government said that its action, that is, its first advisory on February 15th was on time, and that India knew as much as other countries did. The government essentially saying that compare our actions to other countries. And that's exactly what we will be doing on this show. To fact check the Indian government's claims, I spent the last 14 days examining the response by 124 countries. This involved sifting through thousands of documents on their websites, on the websites of their foreign offices, their foreign ministers, on the websites of their embassies in Ukraine and their ambassadors to Ukraine, and also the verified social media handles of their foreign offices, foreign ministers, ambassadors, and embassies. I also became part of Telegram groups some of these countries had made to have a direct line of communication with their citizens in Ukraine. Some of these advisories were in local languages, some of these documents were in local languages, and were even deleted as they had to be replaced with updated ones as the situation evolved. So I retrieved them from web archives. I also contacted officials and private citizens of these countries to give me those advisories when they were issued at that point of time. I also spoke with private citizens, mayors, ambassadors, and deputy ministers of these countries to get you the real picture. As a result of our 2-week-long investigation, we have found that at least 46 countries sent a clear advisory to their citizens in Ukraine asking them to leave days, weeks, and in some cases almost a month before India sent its first advisory. And the Indian government claims that India was one of the first few countries to send an advisory to its citizens. I also found that advisories by at least 46 countries had a well-defined call to action for its citizens. Unlike India's first advisories, they use appropriate words to communicate the level of threat that existed. For example, should leave now, leave ASAP, leave in 24 to 48 hours, leave immediately, and leave at the earliest. As opposed to India's first generic advisories by at least 46 countries gave a dose of reality to its citizens that Russia's attack on Ukraine was almost certain. To communicate threat perception and the level of urgency, these 46 countries informed their citizens that air, rail, and road transport might not be available when the attack happens, and that citizens should not expect any evacuation when that happens. India's advisories, which anyway came way later than these 46 countries, had no such details. It only said that Indians may leave. That too came on February 15th. No mention of how high the level of threat was, no sense of urgency, and no warning about how an invasion would leave Indian citizens stuck in Ukraine. The Indian government didn't provide details that are needed to make an advisory worth taking seriously, but was quick to blame students for not taking those advice and advisories seriously. A major reason for students to not leave Ukraine was the impact it would have on their education. I found out that some countries actually did manage to seal an arrangement with Ukraine's educational universities to let their citizens leave and still continue education through distance learning, as a result of which some of these nationals did actually leave early, way earlier than Indian citizens. We found that the decision of Indian students to actually trust the Indian government left them in a limbo. We found that the Indian citizens in Ukraine started contacting the embassy, pleading to the embassy from as early as January 25th, but it took the Indian government 3 weeks to simply come out of its inactive zone, way later than at least 46 countries. We found that other citizens, nationals of other countries, had huge advantage over Indians when it comes to booking flight tickets, courtesy the timely advisories their government sent them. Instead of making up for its mistake of sending a very late advisory, we found that the Indian government did next to nothing in comparison to at least 46 countries, even after February 15th till as late as the war started, because those 46 countries followed up their advisories with concrete action. Some of these 46 countries that acted much swifter and did much more and sent multiple advisories in comparison to India had, some of these countries, not all of them, had less than 100 nationals in Ukraine, and yet they did much better than India. And you'll be seeing documentary evidence running on our screens through this documentary to say that with conviction. Before we start presenting to you the documentary evidence that we have collected over the last 2 weeks, let me tell you the names of at least 46 countries which sent clear advisories asking their citizens to leave Ukraine days, weeks, and in some cases almost a month before India sent its first advisory. These were Australia, the US, Canada, Norway, South Korea, Denmark, Finland, Japan, Latvia, Greece, Israel, Bahamas, Jordan, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Sweden, Albania, Romania, Croatia, Netherlands, New Zealand, Belgium, Bulgaria, Morocco, Germany, Italy, Slovenia, Lebanon, Libya, Spain, Portugal, Iran, Iraq, United Kingdom, Ireland, Lithuania, Czech Republic, Cyprus, Serbia, Singapore, Namibia, North Macedonia, and Luxembourg and Estonia. Stay with us as we now start presenting the documentary evidence that we have collected with excruciating efforts over the last 14 days. Let's rewind to Jan 21st. The Australian government asked its citizens to have plans in place to depart from Ukraine as quickly as possible. That's 25 days before India issued its first advisory. Just 3 days later, Australia put out this second advisory. This one asks its nationals to leave right away. That's 22 days before India's first advisory. On Jan 23rd, the US asked its citizens in Ukraine to consider departing right away, warning military action from Russia could come at any time. That's 23 days before India sent its first advisory. On February 11th, President Joe Biden himself made an appeal to citizens to leave. It was followed by a level 4 advisory asking citizens to depart right away and to exercise extra precaution due to crime, unrest and potential combat operation. So a month before Russia's attack on Ukraine, the US had started issuing repeated red alert warnings to its citizens, making it very clear to them that they must leave Ukraine right away and that the government would not be able to evacuate them later. That has been twisted by India's spin masters to suggest that, while the US abandoned its citizens, India continued with its evacuation efforts, whereas the reality is that while on one hand, countries like the US gave a month's notice to its citizens to leave and issued repeated strongly worded advisories so that their citizens can take an informed decision, India on the other hand gave its citizens a small 9-day window to leave on February 15th, and that advisory too didn't have the much needed tone of urgency. As per USA's estimate last year, it had 6,600 nationals in Ukraine. India had 20,000 nationals, more than thrice. Which country do you think was more prudent? Which country do you think did a better job? The difference is clear for all to see. On Feb 24th, Norway advises citizens to take an overview of departure opportunities, categorically saying that the situation in Ukraine may change at a very short notice. And on Feb 11th, it asked its citizens to leave Ukraine right away, citing significant strength building by the Russians. In the same advisory, it advises citizens to use exit opportunities urgently, as later Norway's foreign service will have limited opportunities to help its citizens out. On Jan 25th, Canada issued its first advisory to citizens asking them to evaluate if their presence in the country was essential. That's 21 days before India sent its first advisory, which even spoke about the prospect of having citizens to leave from Ukraine. And on Feb 11th, as early as Feb 1st rather, Canada asked its citizens to leave from Ukraine. I contacted South Korean nationals because I wanted to know what the government there did, and they have shared with me multiple advisories that their government sent to them. I'm now going to tell them what all steps the South Korean government took to help its citizens out, and these steps will leave you amazed, shocked. On Jan 25th itself, the South Korean government advised its citizens to leave from Ukraine's 15 provinces which were near Russian borders. On Feb 12th, the South Korean government activated level 4 warning, which essentially meant emergency evacuation of citizens. In that advisory, it asked citizens to leave Ukraine right away, but what it did after that is mind-blowing. The very next day, on Feb 13th, the South Korean government announced that it would fly citizens out from Ukraine in special charter flights so that its citizens don't have to go through the trouble of booking tickets in commercial airlines. On February 14th, the South Korean government also arranged rental bus services to take citizens to Ukraine's neighboring countries. This bus service, in fact, operated from February 14th to February 24th. That is the day when Russians attacked Ukraine. On February 19th, the South Korean government issued a fifth advisory reminding their citizens to leave urgently. In this, they also provided maps to citizens who decided to stay back in Ukraine. These maps had verified locations of safe houses, bomb shelters, air defense shelters, and evacuation centers in Ukraine, which can be used by South Koreans to protect themselves from shellings and bombings. Now, on the same day itself, the South Korean distributed these emergency backpack survival kits, which are up on your screens, to all its citizens 5 days before Russia's attack. These kits had radios, safety belts, lanterns, torch, foldable pocket coats, rock cutters, whistles, masks, sanitizers, paper soap, first aid box, among several other things that can come really handy in dire circumstances. For its citizens in cities near the Russian border, the government went to the extent of delivering these emergency survival kits right to their homes via courier service. In this advisory, the South Korean government also announced that it would soon be sending them Safety West. Safety West. By now, all that India had done was issue a single lightweight advisory and was still 3 days away from operating its only flight that it arranged, that actually managed to fly from Ukraine and bring Indians back home. When countries were doing all of this, the question is, what was the Modi government busy doing in the whole month from January 25th to February 24th? What's been the response like among your friends from other countries?
See,
Who
I
were
have
in
friends in I have friends from South Korea, and they I think left around 2 to 3 weeks ago. They left very early, even before anything started. Their embassy asked them to leave back, so they left I think 3 weeks earlier. And also someone from Kenya, yeah, right. In my group, there, because my group has all international students, so even Moroccans in my group, there are like 7, 8 of them. They have also left. All of them are gone. People from Kenya also have gone. Other embassies have made sure that all of them got evacuated before time properly. They had assisted them all the way.
You're telling me that your friends from South Korea and Kenya left as early as in the first 10 days or 15 days of February because their embassies helped them out, one, and B, they sent them clear advisories. Now, had those clear advisories been sent to you much earlier, because the first one came in from the Indian government on February 15th, that too said that nationals may leave. May was the word used. Do you think if the wording was more accurate as to or was similar to the language used in advisories of other countries and had come in earlier, you would have also left?
Yeah, in this case, if they would have, see, I read the advisory and they said May, and here a lot of people I know, like Indian families who are living over here, they said that everything's gonna be fine. So I thought, okay, I'll stay. If they would have said that no, you must go, you must leave, I would have gone the same day. Besides, the day embassy sent the advisory, all the tickets were very, very high. The price was very high, 1 lakh, 1.5 lakh. We are from middle class families, we can't afford all that.
On January 25th itself, Denmark issued its first advisory asking citizens not to travel to Ukraine, and on Feb 11th, it did go on to issue a red warning to all its citizens asking them to leave from Ukraine. It said, and I quote, "It is still possible for all Danes to leave Ukraine using air, road and rail transport. It is not possible to say when these opportunities may be curtailed." Let's now come to February 4th. Jamaica issued 3 updates to its students in just 8 days. The first advisory came as early as Feb 4th, in which it encouraged its students to make preparations in the event they decide to leave Ukraine on short notice. On Feb 8th, its foreign affairs minister tweeted to inform its nationals about the steps the government had taken to make it easy for them to leave Ukraine. She tweeted, and I quote, "Students who are still in Ukraine, we want to tell you about the steps we have taken. Those who don't have US or UK visa can travel home through Germany, provided their transit period is not more than 24 hours. The government arranged that for its students. In the third communication issued on Feb 11th, Jamaica encouraged students to make arrangements to travel quickly if circumstances change. All in all, 3 updates in just 8 days, all before India sent its first advisory. That's India's response versus Jamaica's response, a country which just had 12 nationals stuck in Ukraine. You heard that right. Jamaica just had 12 nationals stuck in Ukraine, and yet it sent 3 informational dispatches in just 8 days, way before India sent its first advisory for its 20,000 nationals. February 11th and 12th were such important days because these were the days when many countries issued advisories to their citizens as Russia's military build-up peaked. India, of course, wasted these 4 crucial days in total silence, even as country after country kept sending advisories to their nationals to leave Ukraine right away. On Feb 11th, North Macedonia issued an advisory asking its citizens to leave Ukraine as soon as possible. On Feb 11th itself, Finland recommended its citizens to urgently exit Ukraine. And like various other countries, it stressed on how land and commercial connections may not soon be available if the situation changes. Its advisory also said, and I quote, "In a crisis situation, the foreign ministry's ability to assist is always limited." This came 4 crucial days before India issued its first not so specific advisory on Feb 15th. On the same day itself, Greece too issued its first advisory to citizens asking them to get in touch, and on Feb 14th advised them to leave Ukraine right away. On Feb 11th itself, Latvia also asked its citizens to leave Ukraine. 2 days later, Latvia issued a second advisory asking its citizens to leave as soon as possible at the earliest opportunity. It had around 2,700 nationals in Ukraine, roughly 9 to 10 times lower than India. A country with roughly 2,700 nationals was willing to err on the side of caution and sent 2 red alert advisories. India, with 20,000 nationals, was still 4 days away from telling its citizens that they may leave. May was the word used by India. That's not all. The next day, that is on Feb 14th, Latvia arranged 2 additional direct flights from Ukraine to Latvia for as early as Feb 15th and 16th. On the same day, that is February 14th, Latvia's foreign minister issued another note going in great detail to explain to citizens why it was important for them to leave urgently. He wrote, and I quote, "Latvians in Ukraine must leave as soon as possible. I am really sorry that it has turned out like this, but due to the concentration of Russian forces at the Ukrainian borders, it is our duty to inform and warn our compatriots about the seriousness of the situation. Some airlines are already interrupting flights, and it is possible that insurance companies will prevent many airlines from making flights to and from Ukraine. This could make it difficult to leave Ukraine very soon. With the situation radically worsening, it would be impossible for diplomats to help Latvians in leaving Ukraine. The safety of our people is our top priority, so it's better to warn and apologize for the inconvenience later." End quote. This by a country that had just 2007 nationals, but for a country where clearly each life mattered. Compare that response to the Indian government's, which has been claiming that it was one of the first countries to send an advisory to its citizens, that it did as well as other countries, if not better. The facts, if you value facts though, that we are putting forth are convincingly, are conclusively saying that the Indian government's claims were false. In case India missed out on these warnings flowing in on February 11th, an advisory came from a land not very far away from India, Japan, which issued a level 4 advisory, its highest level of threat alert, on Feb 11th. It advised citizens to leave Ukraine right away. The advisory, as you can see on your screens, is titled "Please Evacuate," to communicate the level of urgency. It gave a dose of reality to its citizens by writing that aircrafts may be suspended. Many countries likewise recommend leaving Ukraine, which could make it extremely difficult to leave the country in the future, as reservation for commercial flights make it difficult to secure seats. For this reason, please evacuate right away. Japan had roughly 150 nationals in Ukraine. India had 20,000. Japanese government though clearly took the cue coming in from rest of the world, while India was still 4 days away from coming out of its inactive mode. And yet the Modi government claims that it was one of the first few countries to send an advisory to students, and that it gave a lot of advance notice to Indian nationals, and that it did as well as any country could have. There were at least 46 countries doing much more, much swiftly, and with greater amount of seriousness. Fact checked. Now let me give you an example of a country which had roughly the same number of nationals in Ukraine as India. Israel, some 15,000. On Feb 11th, Israel asked Israelis to reconsider the need to stay in Ukraine and avoid approaching high-risk areas. That's 4 days before India's first advisory. And on Feb 11th, on 12th, Israel's second advisory asked citizens to leave Ukraine right away as soon as possible. So not just was Israel updating its advisory on a daily basis, it also followed up those advisories with concrete chain of actions. A major reasons for students, be it Israelis or Indians or others, to not leave Ukraine was the impact it would have on their ongoing education. So, over the next 2 days, the Israeli government on Feb 13th and 14th got into a hectic round of negotiations with Ukraine's educational institutions to let their citizens, to let 2,000 Israeli students leave and continue their education through distance learning. And on Feb 15th, Israel managed to pull off a major breakthrough by managing to seal an agreement with Ukraine's universities to let Israelis continue their studies remotely, allowing them to leave Ukraine, all before India's first advisory on Feb 15th. In fact, it was because of this alacrity that more than 2,000 Israelis could leave by as early as Feb 16th. That's not all. Israel also added direct flights from Israel to Ukraine. In fact, it scheduled as many as 32 direct flights from Ukraine to Israel between Feb 14th and 20th. And as we will show you ahead in this episode, India meanwhile managed to effectively fly out just one new Ukraine to India direct flights in the 9 days between its first advisory and the day war started. We in fact have video evidence to corroborate how those steps, those efforts by the Israeli government put Israelis at a much greater advantage over Indians. Listen in to this Indian student who told me that his Israeli batchmates left early because the embassy alerted them much before and explained the level of threat to them that existed there in Ukraine. Listen in. Government is repeatedly saying one thing, that we sent out an advisory in advance, but these students didn't listen to us. What's your response to the government on that?
I tell you, we are having many international friends with us in our university, like from Israel, Govt, and Canada, UK, and many other countries. Their embassies, my very good friend from Israel, like his embassy from 4 to 5 Feb, his embassy is told you should move out of the country or we will evacuate whole Israelis in about 1 week. They are out of the country.
Strict warning is being issued to nationals of Israel to leave Ukraine without any delay. This was on February 12th, 3 days before India sent out a very casual advisory. So what happened to your Israeli friends? Were they able to leave in time?
Before 13 or 14 Feb. Yeah, they left.
They left. Suppose the Indian government, like the US government and other governments, was sending out these very strongly worded advisories to you, raising those red flags, telling you categorically that the situation may turn out
Yeah.
not so good in the days ahead. Would
Yeah, if
you have left
only
out?
our government, like from the so many countries, only our embassies was so casual with the thing, like nothing will happen.
रात को लास्ट नाइट की बात है व्हेन वी कुड हियर लाइक द बॉम्ब फेलिंग नेक्स्ट टू अस लाइक वेरी क्लोज वी डोंट इवन नो द लोकेशन क्योंकि हम बाहर तक नहीं गए
क्या उस इलाके में जहां अभी आप कारगिल में हैं, क्या सिर्फ इंडियंस ही हैं जो फंसे हुए हैं और बाकी देशों का क्या हाल है? बाकी देशों के बच्चों का क्या हाल है? व्हाट अबाउट nationals of other countries? Have they been evacuated by their countries?
Sir, they have been actually evacuated by their countries long before now. उनको before the Indian government even gave its first advisory, Israel, China, other governments they actually evacuated their students.
They provided buses, they provided routes, they provided everything कि ऐसे ऐसे लेके जाएंगे. We was all waiting कि Indian government हमें बताए कि यहाँ से कहाँ जाना है.
क्या ये आपके जान पहचान के लोग थे, जैसे आप बता रहे थे कि इजराइल के लोग और बाकी देशों के, या आप अपना पर्सनल वेरीफाइड लोगों
वो हमारे क्लासमेट्स थे, हमारे ग्रुपमेट्स थे, बट हम सिर्फ वेट कर रहे थे. वो हमें बोल रहे थे दैट व्हाई डोंट यू इवैक्यूएट सून एंड वी वर वेटिंग फॉर आवर एम्बेसी टू से समथिंग, फॉर आवर कॉलेजेस टू शट डाउन.
Can the Indian government still claim that it performed better than others, that it was one of the first few countries to issue advisories to students, that it gave a lot of advance notice to students, that there were no shortcomings in the Indian government's response, and that it did as well as any country could have? And also this narrative in which the blame is being put on poor students. The facts that we are presenting are speaking loudly for all to conclude that the Modi government's claims were false. Let's now come to February 12th. Bahamas issued an advisory on Feb 12th asking its citizens to leave in 24 to 48 hours. It was that specific and came 3 days before India's first generic advisory on Feb 15th. On Feb 12th, Jordan too asked its citizens to leave from Ukraine. There were around 2,600 Jordan nationals, and yet it issued this advisories 3 crucial days ahead of India, which had 20,000 nationals. On Feb 12th, both Kuwait and Saudi Arabia too urged their citizens to leave Ukraine right away, 3 days before India's first advisory that just said that Indians may leave. On Feb 12th itself, another nation, Qatar, issued a plain advisory to its citizens. The same day, Bahrain too advised its nationals to leave. On Feb 12th itself, even Luxembourg called on its nationals to leave Ukraine as soon as possible, all sending a very clear line of communication 3 days before India sent its first advisory on Feb 15th. Sweden too urged its nationals to leave Ukraine as soon as possible on Feb 12th. Its advisory gave a reality check to its citizens, warning that the situation can worsen quickly and that may limit the embassy's ability to provide consular support. 200 to 300 Sweden nationals were in Ukraine at this time, and yet this advisory came 3 days before India's, which had 20,000 nationals. I can't stress this enough. It was raining advisories on Feb 12th. Another country to send one was Romania, which raised a travel alert threat level for Ukraine and recommended its citizens in Ukraine to reevaluate the need to stay in Ukraine, to remain in Ukraine. That day itself, another country, Albania, called on its citizens to leave Ukraine as soon as possible. Its advisory, which is up on your screens, stressed that this was due to credible risk of escalation of the situation. A well-written advisory being sent 3 days before India's first, which just mentioned that Indians may leave. On Feb 12th, Croatia too called on its citizens to leave Ukraine. Croatian ambassador to Ukraine said that there were around 100 Croatians in Ukraine at this time. India had 20,000 nationals, and yet Croatia was 3 days ahead of India in sending its first advisory. On Feb 12th itself, Netherlands issued a red level alert advisory to its citizens, asking them to leave Ukraine as soon as possible as the situation had worsened further. Can't get clearer than this. Compare that to India's generic first advisory sent on Feb 15th, which didn't have such details to let their citizens know of the level of threat that existed, and also to enable them to take an informed decision. And then Union Minister Piyush Goyal goes on record to say that students didn't take India's advice seriously, that students didn't take India's advisory seriously. Please read your own advisories and compare that to these advisories which came in from at least 46 countries and had a much more serious tone. On Feb 12th, New Zealand too advises citizens to leave Ukraine urgently. It didn't shy away from mentioning that its citizens should not rely on the government with evacuation when the Russian attack happens. That descriptive advisory, it says, was based on inputs it had of potential risk and designed to assist its nationals in Ukraine take their own informed decisions. And that's what really mattered, right? Informed decisions. Compare Indian government's lethargic response with the New Zealand's advanced notices, despite the fact that New Zealand had less than 50 nationals in Ukraine, and India had 20,000 nationals. And the New Zealand government didn't stop at just sending out advisories. As our 2-week-long investigation has found, the government contacted citizens directly in person on an individual basis on its safe travel platform. February 12th was such a long and an important day. Looking at how many countries were sending their first advisories or updating their old ones makes one wonder, was the government of India not keeping a track? What was the government of India busy doing since Jan 21st, but more precisely on Feb 11th and 12th? Presenting to you more countries. Belgium's note to citizens on February 12th read, and I quote, "Belgians are strongly advised to leave Ukraine," adding that an evacuation could not be guaranteed as communication and transport lines could be seriously hampered when the situation worsens. A categorical warning and a bitter but much needed dose of reality that neither India's first advisory on February 15th nor India's second advisory on Feb 20th cared to give our citizens. And instead of owning up their mistakes, the government was quick to pin the blame on poor students for not taking the Indian government's ambiguous advisories seriously. On Feb 12th itself, Bulgaria also asked its citizens to leave Ukraine. On the same day, Morocco advises nationals to exit Ukraine. Unlike India's, there was no may leave in these advisories coming in from at least 46 countries, advisories which are continuously running on your screens as part of our investigation, which, as I said, has taken excruciating efforts to put together. At least 8,000 Moroccan students were there at the time when the country issued this advisory. At that time, I'll mention again, India had 20,000 nationals. The list is still on. February 12th itself, Germany and Italy both asked their citizens in Ukraine to return home. Slovenia also issued an advisory on Feb 12th asking its citizens to ensure a safe return. These developments happening 3 days before India sent its first advisory. Next was Lebanon. It too opted for February 12th to issue an advisory asking its citizens in Ukraine to be extremely cautious in light of the prospects of a Russian offensive. The very next day, on Feb 13th, it asked Lebanese nationals to quickly leave Ukraine. Now what you will see will tell you how other countries did so much more than India instead of just merely issuing advisories. while India had in fact not even sent that till February 15th. To reassure its students' community, Lebanon on the very same day began contacting Ukraine's universities to find possible solutions to ensure that their students get to continue their studies even when they leave Ukraine through distance learning. Compare that response to India, which, as I said, I'll keep mentioning again and again, had 20,000 nationals. The facts in our investigation exposing the reality of the Indian government's claims. There's more. Stay on with us. Let me make this quick now. Libya advises citizens to leave Ukraine on Feb 12th. The very same day, Spain advised nationals living in Ukraine to seriously consider leaving Ukraine given the volatile security situation. On the same day, that is Feb 12th itself, Portugal advised its citizens in Ukraine to ponder leaving the country. There were believed to be around 240 Portuguese citizens living in Ukraine at that time of decision. India, as I said, I can't stress enough, and hence I'll keep mentioning again and again and again, that had 20,000 nationals. The very same day, Iran's state-affiliated media reported that Iran's embassy in Kyiv called on its citizens to be prepared for any eventuality as it raised its travel alert from normal to red and opened a 24/7 direct line of communication with its citizens. Iran had roughly 5,000 nationals in Ukraine, 1/4 of the Indian number. I also wanted to know what Iraq did, so I became a member of a Telegram group made by its foreign ministry specifically for its nationals in Ukraine. And after sifting through and examining hundreds of messages in Arabic and translating them, I found this high alert advisory which Iraq sent in the group on February 12th itself. It said, and I quote, "Due to exceptional circumstances there, we urge the honorable Iraqi community to leave the Ukrainian lands." Iraqi community in Ukraine comprised of 5537 members, roughly 1/4 the size of the Indian community. But look at the difference in the language that was used in Iraq's first advisory and the kind of language that was used in India's first advisory, and the fact that it came in 3 days before India's first advisory. Also look at how the Iraqi government took this step to form a Telegram group for its citizens so that a direct line could be established with each one of them to ensure that at no cost the advisory gets missed by any of the community members in Ukraine. Other countries were doing so much more and at a very fast pace. Look at to what extent the United Kingdom went to persuade its citizens to leave Ukraine. On Feb 12th, the first advisory sent by the British government said that the British nationals should leave now. A day later, on February 13th, the UK government followed up that advisory with concrete action needed to support those and needed to encourage those British citizens who were interested in leaving Ukraine. It announced financial support to those leaving Ukraine. The government gave an emergency loan to those in need. It also allowed visas for non-British dependents of British nationals. The UK government also started Keep My Passport service. It essentially allowed applicants the flexibility to keep their passports while their visa application was being processed. This was important because it allowed the applicants this flexibility. Many people had the concern that what if they have to flee before the visa application was over. The second communication with the Britishers, which is up on your screens, made it very clear as earlier as on Feb 13th that the British nationals should not expect any help with evacuation following any Russian military activity in Ukraine. The British government didn't stop there. On Feb 14th, UK's Foreign Secretary, no less, issued a video appeal announcing it without mincing words that there could be a Russian invasion almost urgently. Citizens need to leave. Here's that video.
We are fully aware that there could be a Russian invasion almost immediately. That is why British citizens do need to leave Ukraine.
Things, as you see, were moving on a daily basis. The very next day, on February 15, the UK government issued another advisory to citizens, this time announcing that they had opened another embassy office to provide consular access to its citizens in Ukraine. On the same day, that is on February 15th, even UK's Home Office issued an appeal asking its citizens to leave. India's Home Ministry, meanwhile, anywho, this was UK government's fifth communication to its citizens in 4 days. Point to be noted, before India even sent its first generic advisory on February 15th. 3 days on February 18th, the UK government sent another advisory asking its citizens yet again to leave now. That's what the advisory read. The British government was still not done. The next day, on February 19th, it issued another advisory asking British nationals to leave, warning them of communication and transport disruption in the event of any military incursion. Seventh communication by the British government to its citizens in just 8 days, while India had just sent one depthless advisory. As we continue to show more and more irrefutable proof on checks and balance, it's getting clearer that the Indian government's claims were false. We got more documentary evidence for you. On February 12th, Ireland advised its citizens in Ukraine to leave. Point to be noted, there were just 145 Irish nationals in Ukraine. Now, 2 days later, on February 14th, Ireland sent a second advisory to its citizens to push them to leave urgently. So Ireland, with 145 nationals, sent 2 advisories with clear call to actions in 3 days, whereas India, with 20,000 nationals, not just sent its first advisory late, but even its first advisory was a pretty generic one, and its second advisory came only 5 days later on February 20th. So much for urgency and a lot of advance notice and being better than other countries that the Indian government has been claiming on record. Now on February 13th, the next day, Lithuania also advised its citizens to leave Ukraine urgently, and it cited possible air traffic disruptions. 4 days later, it issued a second advisory urging citizens to leave, stressing that Russia's military aggression may make it impossible to leave Ukraine. Look at that information that's needed to compel citizens to think about leaving Ukraine. Information that makes it worth taking an advisory seriously for. Information that wasn't there in any of the Indian advisories sent till as late as February 22nd. That is 2 days before the war broke out. And then the Indian government goes on record to claim that their advisories were not taken seriously by students. The fake claims, the twisted claims versus the reality being revealed layer by layer up on your screens. On February 13th itself, another country, Cyprus too, issued an advisory asking its citizens to leave, warning that in case of a further worsening of the situation, the airlines may suspend their flights to and from Ukraine. Indians were not warned about that in any of the advisories. On the same day, Czech Republic urged its citizens to leave Ukraine as soon as possible because the airspace may close as soon as today, it said. That is on February 13th. It also said that in the event of an armed conflict, it would be very difficult to dispatch planes. Look at the language, so specific and detailed, sent 2 days before India's first skin-deep advisory. Ask yourself, which advisory would you take more seriously? India's, which just said Indians may leave, didn't give information the ones that other advisories were giving, or advisories like Czech Republic's and the ones various other countries were sending with proper notes, detailed information, and a clear communication of the urgency and the level of threat perception? The answer, I think, is very, very clear. On February 13th itself, Serbia too recommended its nationals to consider the possibility of leaving Ukraine. Hours later, Singapore too advised citizens to leave Ukraine as soon as possible with a dire warning. And here's an interesting bit. Singapore does not even have a mission, an embassy in Ukraine, and yet it was 2 days ahead of India in sending an advisory, and that too an advisory with a lot of details. Also, Singapore just had 19 nationals in Ukraine, just 19. And look at the kind of response and compare that to the Indian governments. Moving on February 14th, Namibia too issued an advisory to its citizens that the mission would assist with consular arrangements should a student wished to leave. This advisory coming in a day before India's first advisory. Now, there is a country which did issue an advisory to its citizens asking them to leave on the same day as India did, that is on February 15th. India's neighbor Bangladesh, and it had roughly around 500 nationals in Ukraine. So India's actions were as swift as Bangladesh, a country that had 40 times lesser number of citizens in Ukraine in comparison to India. Now, apart from these 46 countries, there were many countries among the 124 countries that I examined that didn't issue an advisory simply because they didn't have any registered nationals in Ukraine. For example, Cambodia, which went on record to say that there were no nationals in Ukraine. But India had a lot at stake. To be precise, 20,000 lives. Now, even after this comprehensive fact check, the spin masters would ask, if so many countries were sending advisories, how come the Indian students didn't know what was about to happen? If the Indian government, with access to intelligence inputs, departments meant to track global developments, and with the presence of an embassy in Ukraine itself, didn't send an advisory till as late as February 15th, you expect Indian students to know more than the Indian government, do more than the Indian embassy? Well, they actually did. Presenting to you the next part of our investigation. In our 2-week-long examination, we found that the Indian students contacted the Indian embassy for help as early as January 25th. That's right, that's 21 days before India issued its first advisories. The students wrote to the Indian embassy, and I'm going to quote from some of them. Please guide, as there is disputed information floating around. The students wanted an official word from their own Indian embassy, like their friends from at least 46 countries had received. Can you really call them unfair? Was this not the very job for which the Indian embassy in Ukraine exists? This Indian student, take a look at what's running on your screens, wrote to the Indian embassy. This student wrote to the Indian embassy that there was pressure from Ukraine's educational institutions on them to stay in Ukraine, to not leave from Ukraine. Students were clearly caught in a limbo and they wanted the Indian government to step in. What was the government of India busy doing from Jan 25th to February 15th? As we have shown, other countries like Israel did manage to strike official deals with Ukraine's universities to let Israelis leave and still continue their education through distance learning. But students clearly say that India's actions were slow ineffective, and not at all serious. Students had legitimate concerns. One wrong move could have wasted their years of education and lakhs of money. They wanted the government of India to intervene and strike an arrangement with Ukraine's universities like several other countries had. But as we see in India's advisory sent on February 22nd, Indian government clearly couldn't strike a deal with Ukraine's universities, because in that advisory, the government advised Indian students to not wait to hear back from the universities and just leave. Other countries managed what India could not because they had the first movers advantage. As opposed to at least 46 countries, instead of the Indian embassy alerting Indian students, we saw that Indian students were alerting the Indian embassy. That's how messed up this was. To hide its big lapses, the government of India has pinned the blame on students, asking what stopped students from leaving Ukraine after India's first advisory on February 15th. We'll now prove with evidence that government's delay in sending that first advisory was the very reason that left Indian students with very few options to exit Ukraine, and how, even after sending that late advisory, even after that, the government of India did next to nothing in comparison to other countries for Indian students over the next few days till the war started on February 24th and everything shut down. Presenting to you facts of what really transpired between February 15th and February 24th, that is, between the day India issued its first advisory and the day war started and everything shut down. Take a good hard look at what's running on your screens. On February 16th, the Indian Embassy in Ukraine published this answers to frequently asked questions by Indians in Ukraine. This tell-all file demolishes the narrative being built against students for not trying to leave Ukraine post Government of India's first advisory on February 15th. Look at the top question itself. The top question from students was about all future flights to India being completely booked and students facing failure to secure a seat to fly back. In the reply section to this first question, the embassy admitted that the government was still in discussion to expand flights from Ukraine to India. So if all future flights to India were booked, were full, post the government of India's advisory on February 15th, how were students supposed to fly back to India? Now moving on. On the next day, that is February 17th, nothing happened. It was only on February 18th that the government of India announced 3 additional flights from Ukraine to India for February 22nd, 24th and 26th. So effectively, between February 15th and February 22nd, there was no vacant direct flight from Ukraine to India, even though students wanted to fly back. Also, take a look. It took the Indian government a whole week to arrange just one additional direct flight from Ukraine to India. Talk about urgency, speed and timeliness that the government of India has been claiming. In fact, I took a deep dive into that tweet put out by Air India on February 18th announcing those 3 flights, and the reply section reveals that even tickets to those 3 flights got sold out in as less as 16 to 17 minutes. Take a look at those tweets and it will make you very clear how students were eager. They wanted to fly back, but they didn't have access to any tickets because they got sold out. So clearly the issue was not of lack of demand, as the spin masters would like you to believe, but of the lack of supply from the Indian side. And in replies to that very tweet, students complained about ticket prices being as high as $800, more than thrice than what it actually cost. Students wrote about being desperate to return, but also being short on money to afford these costly flights meant to rescue Indians. So Indians clearly wanted to leave, but neither were there enough additional flights arranged by the government of India, nor was the affordability factored in by the government of India. It's easier to blame the victims than to actually take steps to protect them. Now, even after this comprehensive fact check, the spin masters might ask, what if the direct flights were occupied? Why can't these students book connecting flights? Why didn't they book connecting flights? The reality is they did try. And even those connecting flights and flights to other countries were booked by nationals of countries who had got advisories before India, particularly on February 11th and February 12th. Others enjoyed a massive advantage over Indians in booking flights to these connecting flights because the government of India sent its advisory too late. To be precise, as our investigation has shown, after 46 countries. And that reflected because Indians were losing out when it comes to booking these flights. The remaining few tickets were anyway too less for our 20,000 nationals in Ukraine and too costly for a majority of students from humble background. So inability to afford a connecting flight because of the high demand, and also failure to secure a seat in these flights, the two problems Indian nationals had to face because the government of India sent its advisory way late on February 15th, and the government's inability to arrange more additional direct flights quickly from Ukraine to India was the real story, and not the lack of willingness of these students to fly back as it's being made out to be by spin masters. That's exactly what students also told me when I spoke to some of them stuck in Ukraine earlier this month. Listen in.
I decided that okay, I will book a ticket and I'll go back because maybe the situation might get worse. And then when I tried looking for the tickets, I found the price was very high. It was around 55,000 rupees for one side. For some flights, another one even more expensive. Nothing cheaper than that.
And usually, what is the cost of one-way ticket from Ukraine to India?
Just one day ago, the flights were around 15,000 to 20,000 rupees of one side to go to India.
So almost over three times and close to 4 times the cost. And these were, which airline was this?
They were direct airlines, UIA from here, and Qatar Airways, Lufthansa, and I think Turkish Airlines, Air Arabia.
And Air India also announced special flights for February 22nd, 24th, 25th. Did you try looking for those tickets for that flight?
No, I got to know that the price of those tickets was very high. So I decided not to go for that. I mean, if I had to pay, I decided, okay, I'll just look for another ticket which might be much cheaper.
So the cost hit you hard.
इंडियन गवर्नमेंट ने हमें ये कुछ नहीं बताया, बस ये बोला है कि खार्किव रीजन में जितने बच्चे हैं वो वहीं बंकर्स में रहेंगे, और बोला है जो आ सकते हैं पोलैंड या फिर हंगरी या फिर कोलासिया के बॉर्डर पे आ जाए, जो लिटरली बहुत ज्यादा इम्पॉसिबल सिचुएशन जैसी है, क्योंकि बाहर कॉन्टिन्यूसली शेलिंग और बॉम्बार्डमेंट हो रही है. हम कैसे बाहर जाएं, अपने बंकर्स को कैसे रोकें, बाहर निकले वहां से.
गवर्नमेंट तो एडवाइस पीस ऑफ पेपर एडवाइस जारी कर रही है और कह रही है हम कर लेंगे सर. अब तक ये 6th डे और आज तक अभी तक हमें खार्की वालों को तो कुछ भी नहीं कहा गया है.
See, what we demand from the government is a help, not issuing advisories, but we really demand what could be feasible for us, what is practically possible. They are saying we should travel to Hungary, Poland, Romania and Slovakian borders and people will assist us. That is actually a transfer. That is not evacuation. अगर हम यहाँ से कहीं और ट्रांसफर करते हैं, उसके बाद हमें इंडियन नेशनल्स इवैक्यूएट करेंगे, एंड अगर उस जर्नी में वी आर नॉट इवन सेफ, देयर इज नो सर्टेनिटी, एंड द इंडियन एम्बेसी इज आस्किंग अस टू ट्रैवल 1500 किलोमीटर्स, व्हिच इज एक्चुअली अनसर्टेन. आगे क्या होगा, बीच में क्या होगा.
Government officials and embassy officials are saying that they are constant. They are trying to remain in constant touch with you. But what is the reality? Are they remaining in touch with you?
Sir, if I tell you the ground reality today,
Yes, please.
nobody is in touch with us except for our consultant here, except for their helpers, except for our subordinates. There is
Those are
nobody
private
in the
individuals.
government.
What about embassy officials?
No embassy official. We tried to contact them. Their numbers were off.
Go down to your.
Guys, move down. There is a shelling.
Sir, the thing is,
There is a shelling. Please move down.
sir, we have to go down to the basement. I'm sorry because it's shelling going on right now.
It was only on February 21st that the government of India announced 2 more flights from Ukraine to India for Feb 25th and 27th. So in all, the government could announce only 5 additional flights from Ukraine to India for as late as February 22nd, 24th, 25th, 26th and 27th. No urgency whatsoever, even after sending its first advisory days, weeks, and in some cases almost a month after at least 46 countries, and that costed us dearly. Indian nationals in Ukraine had to pay a heavy price for that, as on February 24th, Russia attacked Ukraine and the airspace shut, a strong possibility of which was being expressed and stressed by at least 46 countries in advisories after advisories they were sending to their citizens. But neither the Indian government warned Indian students and nationals about that, nor factored that in to ramp up the speed of its own response. Effectively, the government could flew just 1 additional direct flight from Ukraine to India between February 15th and 24th, a 9-day window which was actually the last chance for the government of India to make up for its shortcomings, but the Indian government couldn't optimize it at all. When other countries were working on war footing, this was the response of the Indian government, and this was the pace of its response. These lethal lapses now stand exposed in episode number 3 of Checks and Balance. So the government got laid and then did too little to help Indians stranded in Ukraine, and then to hide all of its mistakes, all of its faults, went into an over-the-top PR drive, a false bravado, and a bouquet of false claims, all of which now stand debunked in this most comprehensive fact check on this matter that we have got for you. After all of this was over, the Indian government also made a big deal about sending ministers to countries which share borders with Ukraine. In episode number 2, we also fact-checked how sending a minister to abroad to those countries made no difference and actually could have made the matters worse. Putting the video of that fact-check in the description below. On March 1st, the government of India made another false claim which we fact-checked in episode number 1, and that claim was that by March 1st no Indian was left in Kyiv, whereas we did exclusive interviews with Indians who were still stuck in Ukraine hours after that claim was made, putting the video of that fact check as well in the description below. With that, we have come to the end of this investigation, but our pursuit of truth will continue. Please spread this around, share this around as much as you can in your circles and help us contain the massive disinformation campaign. This is Saahil Murli Menghani signing off. Thank you so much for watching.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.